The Empire of Tiber Septim has gone through a lot of rough patches throughout its near 1,000 years of history. From a nutjob emperor and his necromancer mother, to one of the Imperials deciding that one continent wasn't enough and picked a fight with Tamriel's eastern neighbor of Akavir, only to disappear with an entire fleet and army. Probably because invading the continent inhabited by snake people and demons of the non-oblivion variety is categorically a bad idea. But none of that comes close to how precarious the Empire's situation is by the time of the Fourth Era. Howdy! I am the Hearth Guy, and this week in my slow but certain decline into madness, I am covering another slow and certain decline. That of the Cyrodiilic Empire of Tiber Septim, the second primary faction in the events of Skyrim. Because I spent the first video explaining why the group I actually side with was on a long walk off a short cliff, so just imagine what I have to say about the mongrel dogs of the Empire, like the second best mortal-turned-god would call them. Sorry, Dagothur, you're a funny man, but my loyalty belongs to my boy Talos. As compared to the Stormcloaks who started off poorly, we have 2 centuries of increasing problems to use as reference for the Empire's sad state of affairs. The Oblivion Crisis was bad, but at least the Empire was united, or as united as they can be against the equivalent of hell itself sucker-punching an entire continent. Morrowind was being kicked while it was down, and Black Marsh was doing its own thing so well that it's become a meme thanks to the alien trees, but at least at the time, there was a clear way to win. Get the amulet, get Sean Bean, flex tape the holes in the world. 200 years later, and things have gotten significantly worse. Blackmarsh clowning on Oblivion went from a meme to a problem as they decided they were better off without the leaderless mess of an empire, and so they seceded immediately following the crisis. Things weren't much better in the other parts of Tamriel. Morrowind was already a hellish nightmarescape since the false tribunal died or dipped and a meteor fell on the place, so the Daedra invading was more or less par for the course. But everywhere else that didn't have Ents with psychedelic blood was barely functioning. The Elder Council was trying to keep the peace and figure out how to replace a millennia-old dynasty of demigods. They probably would have chosen the Champion of Cyrodiil if they hadn't found a more lucrative position as an eldritch horror with every mental disorder. So what remained of the Empire was slowly crawling itself back into a vaguely functional place. And by vaguely functional, I mean Hammerfell was in like its 50th civil war. Skyrim had been and was going through what could only be described as cultural colonization by the Empire. Valenwood and elsewhere got conquered by the literal worst people ever, aka the Aldmeri Dominion, and Cyrodiil's intermediate ruler got assassinated, probably by the Thalmor, and the rest of the country got busy with several warlords fighting for supremacy until one Titus Mede I came out on top as the new, not-so-demigod emperor of this similarly not-so-great empire. This was all relatively early into the Fourth Era, and it didn't really improve from there on out. The heroes and frameworks of the last era were gone, and the Empire was trying all it could to hold on to the barest scraps of legitimacy, as the Aldmeri Dominion was the new hot superpower on the block. Inevitably, this led to the event which everyone can't stop yapping about in Skyrim, the Great War, which, based off how it ended and the obvious real-world parallels, is bound to get a sequel pretty soon. I figure most of us here know the broad strokes from this over a decade-old video game that is synonymous with fantasy itself by this point, but if you don't, Pancreas No Work made a way better video than this about the war, so check that out for a full rundown. The broad strokes are these. The Thalmor walked up to the Emperor with a cart, demanded he give up the southern part of Hammerfell, outlaw the worship of Talos, the god emperor who founded the whole thing and kicked the Thalmor's butt centuries ago, disband the samurai secret service organization that is the Blades, and pay them a bunch of money. The Emperor, Titus Mede II, did what any reasonable man would do, and told them to take their knife ears and demands and go back to the eugenics-ridden backwater they came from. To this, the Thalmor tipped over the cart and revealed the heads of a bunch of already dead Blades, and bing bang boom, the Great War began. That went on for a long time, and Titus Mede managed to, by the grace of Talos and Akatosh no doubt, scrape by long enough to pull off a tie. Not a victory, mind you. A tie. Although you wouldn't be able to tell from the aftermath. The Imperial city had been sacked, Titus running from his own capital to prolong the war effort while Hammerfell was ravaged by the conflict, and Skyrim had opened the floodgates to send out the greatest secret weapon of the Empire. Nords. A lot of people died, and everywhere that wasn't Skyrim, Blackmarsh, and the Somerset Isles were feeling the pain. Yeah, I know Morrowind never got hit either, but they're always feeling pain. It just generally sucks to be in Morrowind. And at that time, it generally sucked to be Titus Mede II. He outlasted the onslaught of the Dominion, but regardless, he still wound up signing into law the demands of the Thalmor, known as the White Gold Concordat. No more Blades, no more Talos, and sure, they can take that land that Hammerfell just spent 5 years fighting to protect. Yeah, Hammerfell saw that as a raw deal and kept fighting as they believed the Empire should have done and could have done if they wanted to, forcing the Emperor to allow them to become independent. 5 years and a lot more bloodshed later, Hammerfell pushed back the elves and seemingly legitimized their own beliefs. Maybe if they had kept fighting, the Empire could have won, but it was too late now. The Blades were disbanded and all their agents were allowed to be hunted by the Thalmor, and just the same, any worshippers of Talos were rounded up and mercilessly persecuted for their beliefs. Pretty much everyone in the Empire who was still in the Empire was pretty unhappy with this arrangement to varying degrees. On a scale of disgruntled to let's all go down to Dixie, let's just say Skyrim, where thousands of Nords came from to die for an empire that gutted the worship of the most important remaining god to the Nords and who left Hammerfell to the wolves at the Dominion's request, was feeling a little bit peeved, and the voice of that frustration became Ulfric Stormcloak. I already covered him and his rebellion in the last video though. This is about the ones he's fighting against and losing to. The Imperial Legion, or just the Imperials. The Imperials of Skyrim, quite frankly, hold all the cards. They've got the best port, which is Solitude, sucks to suck Dawnstar, which serves as a constant source of supplies and occasional reinforcements to the base of their operations in Skyrim. Windhelm also has a port and admittedly is a better defended one as it's further down an icy river that likely they alone know how to traverse, but the Stormcloaks have no real navy and therefore no way to realistically fend off a blockade or other maritime shenanigans. They've got the many mines of the Reach that provide ample and reliable weapons and armor as well as the silver of Markarth's Sidna mine. The wealth generated from the Reach could bankroll an entirely third separate army and still give them a decent chance. The Reach does have a Forsworn problem, but they are usually a negligible issue. The forests and fields of Falkreath, though relatively sparsely populated, are vast. Though Rifted's breadbasket is indeed superior, the amount of lumber that can be feasibly churned out from Falkreath's mills outweigh anything in Stormcloak territory. Morthal is doing something, I'm sure. And when push comes to shove, Whiterun joins up with them, which gives the wide open plains and farmland of Skyrim's center. And as the center, the Whiterun hold gives points of attack for both Dawnstar and Windhelm directly, whereas even if the Stormcloaks had Whiterun, they'd still have to go through Morthal to get to Solitude. Oh, hey, that's something Morthal does. Act as a land-based obstacle for the land-based Stormcloak army. You try marching an army covered head to toe in heavy armor and weapons through a swamp and tell me if that's not an effective deterrent. Not to mention the vampires, the undead, the spiders, and Talos only knows what else haunting the marshes. The vast majority of their army is made up of conscripts, but the leadership positions are made up of real legionnaires with training and experience, many of which fought in the Great War as well. Legate Rikke is a Nord veteran of that war, and she, like many of the Imperial commanders you'll meet, are more akin to proper legionnaires than many of the on-hand conscripts they had to rustle up on short notice. But that direction works wonders when actually able to be utilized. The Stormcloaks also have veteran soldiers like that, such as Galmar Stonefist or Ulfric himself, but with the geography that the Imperials are actually working with, they'll have a better time actually using that experience, since most of the lands in Stormcloak territory are icy winter wonderlands. Now, admittedly, that's if we're thinking defensively, which is what the Imperials should be doing, since they have the benefit of time that the Stormcloaks don't. But the Imperials sadly aren't using that opportunity. The only reason Skyrim isn't flooded with troops this instant is as though Talos himself was mad at them. The mountain passes that connect Skyrim to the rest of the continent are blocked by avalanches and winter conditions. Despite this, the Imperial army seems to be trying to fight a conventional war rather than just waiting out the Stormcloaks and defending their lines, which is either a very poor strategy or indicative of how thin the Empire's resources actually are. What's more, they've got backup from the East Empire Company, the biggest commercial power in the Empire and one directly controlled by the Emperor, which is headed up in Skyrim by the Emperor's own cousin. Of course, it'd be a shame if something happened to her, but I digress. The East Empire Company does suffer some setbacks from interference by the Stormcloak-backed regional competitors of the Shattershields. However, it's a problem that is ultimately solved and ends with the company no longer docking in Windhelm. Why it was docking in Windhelm and why it maintained an open office in the capital of a rebellion is beyond me, but hey, this is the age of mercantilism. There's only so much to go around, so you do what you gotta do. To the west, High Rock has an honestly diverse array of resources and wealth, but it is somewhat disconnected from the entire situation. partly because of constant infighting. However, they are at least comfortably loyal to the Empire, as shown by them ghosting Ulfric when he wrote to them, asking if they'd be interested in also rebelling. Of course, they also have the entire agricultural power of Cyrodiil to the south, which makes the Rift look sad in comparison. While admittedly, Cyrodiil is diverting a lot of resources into a lot of places, and has trouble doing so to Skyrim because of the few land-based passes to Skyrim being blocked, those resources are still there. They aren't going anywhere, unlike the Rift, since that one hold has to be feeding the entire Stormcloak Rebellion at any given time. Now, call a spade, the Empire does have some disadvantages in this little war of succession, and a lot of them are rooted in the people in charge. The whole Imperial cause is rallied around putting Jarl Elisif the Fair, widow to High King Torrig, on the throne of Skyrim. And that might just be the worst look you could possibly have. Because, plain and simple, Elisif is not going to be the leader of Skyrim. If you're on the side of the Imperials, you aren't doing it for Elisif. Well, some of you might, but that's just because you're simps that haven't realized you can't actually marry her without mods. No, if you're an Imperial, you're fighting so the Empire can appoint another monarch of Skyrim, and said monarch can get back to doing nothing because the Empire is taking care of everything. Or as much as they can, because again, looming continental war. Obviously, that kind of idea leaves a bad taste in the mouth of anyone with some sense, even Elisif's own advisors. But in their minds, it's the more practical solution. And they've been doing it for generations, so why stop now? Then there's Tullius, the actual leader of the Imperial cause, and allow me to let my inner Stormcloak come out a bit, because I find the flaming hypocrisy surrounding Tullius to just be the most egregious part about him. I'm not saying Tullius is a hypocrite. No, he at least is able to admit that this is all just orders for him. No, I'm talking about the hypocrisy in regard to how people compare Tullius to Ulfric. Here comes a hot take, because one of the biggest complaints and accusations labeled towards Ulfric and the Stormcloaks is that they're a bunch of racists who hate anyone who isn't a Nord. And while you can make that argument for plenty of Stormcloak sympathizers, Ulfric himself is ambivalent at worst. He's not really happy that his city was given Dark Elves and Argonians to care for even before he became Jarl, but he's also not bothering to go after them because he's got bigger fish to fry. Ulfric and most Stormcloak's biggest grievances with the Dark Elves of Windhelm are that while they live in their city and on their land, they also don't actively help with the Stormcloak cause. Which is also the same problem the Imperials have with, the entire city of Whiterun. The Stormcloak credo of Skyrim's For the Nords is the exact same kind of line you'll hear if you go to literally any other province in Tamriel, especially Morrowind or Blackmarsh. Allow me to remind you that the reason Argonians and Dark Elves are kept separated is because it was the Dark Elves viciously enslaving the Argonians for centuries, and then the Argonians doing it right back. Why do I bring this all up? Because Tullius is a racist. And if he isn't racist, he's just a general, douchebag, specifically towards Nords, which sounds pretty racist to me. He constantly belittles the traditions of the Nords, their culture and way of life. Yeah, he's not thrilled to be in this situation and very clearly would rather be anywhere else, but at least Ulfric isn't going on a tangent every 5 minutes complaining about Dark Elves. Which is doubly insulting because his own right-hand woman is a Nord who has just as much respect for her culture and traditions as Ulfric or Galmar Stonefist do, as she was once a comrade to them in the Great War. But does that make Tullius even once respect or try to sympathize with Nords like her who love their people and the Empire? Nope, not at all. Also, daily reminder that every hold and every Jarl on both sides refuses to let Khajiit into their cities. This is Tamriel. Everyone is racist, especially to the cats. Despite this, they also all allow you as any race to join their armies, and while you could chalk that up to video game logic, it's still a part of the story. Galmar is honestly understandably confused if a non-Nord wants to join the Skyrim is for the Nords group, but he's pretty quick to accept the help if you hate the Empire as much as they all do. The reverse is also true for the Empire. So while we can argue all day about the personal scruples of their leaders, neither are especially picky about who they get to help them. Which naturally segues into the fact that the Empire technically has the Aldmeri Dominion on their side with their vast information network. But let's be honest here, that's the sharpest double-edged sword this side of Clavicus Vile. The Thalmor spies were and are better than even the Blades or Penitus Oculatus, and they actively have a presence in the Stormcloak army in some capacity in two forms. One, they quietly supply them to some degree because they want the slaughter to go on as long as possible, and two, they have actual physical spies in the army which have resulted in such things as Ulfric's capture right before the beginnings of the game. Though it's possible those were just plain Imperial spies, as the Thalmor want this war to go on as long as possible, so having Ulfric captured kind of throws that plan out the window. Oh, also the dragons are back. Because some divine entity is very upset right now and it's either Talos, Lorkhan, or Akatosh. Said dragons actually caused the war to go on longer because Alduin swooped in to accidentally save a captured Ulfric from a close shave by an Imperial headsman. This was only because Alduin was after the Dragonborn, I assume. But either way, the Imperials just having the worst timing. If luck could be quantified, though I don't believe in it, the Imperials would rank somewhere in the negative double digits, because wow is it bad. They managed to capture Ulfric thanks to their spies, but General Tullius moved to execute Ulfric early because he likely thought the Thalmor would try to arrange for Ulfric to escape, because as everyone in this entire situation knows, this war lasting a long time only benefits the elves. However, instead he managed to get the soon-to-be Dragonborn wrapped up in it, and most reasonable people wouldn't want to side with the people who just tried to execute you needlessly because of circumstances. If that wasn't bad enough, the dragon problem is assaulting everyone, and that's one more issue the Imperials have to manage while somehow preparing for an inevitable Second Great War. And it's not even like the Imperials have some kind of fervor to them like the Stormcloaks do. Every single one of them is pretty pessimistic about the Empire's situation, even if they think they can win the Civil War. Because if you think about it, even with Skyrim still in place, they barely survived last time around, and they had to sacrifice a lot to see another day. And that was when everybody was on the same page and Hammerfell was still a part of the Empire. Let's do the math. Skyrim's biggest export militarily is going to be lumber and soldiers, because boy do those Nords like killing elves. I mean, when you really think about it, it's in their blood thanks to Ysgramor. But remove them, what else does the Empire have? Morrowind is, as established, constantly suffering, and from what I've heard, might not actually be a part of the Empire, but is still closely associated with them, considering the East Empire Company visits Solstheim. High Rock's biggest issue is how disconnected it is from the main fight, especially now that Hammerfell isn't necessarily friendly territory. Also, doesn't help that High Rock is regularly split into various competing petty kingdoms, but for the most part, they put that bickering aside when dealing with outside threats. It remains a frequent problem for the province as a whole. The Empire has been rotting since the death of the last Septim, and the Elder Council has grown in power and corruption. Even under the newer Mede dynasty, the Empire has struggled to hold up the crumbling foundations due to a lack of legitimacy and the encroaching threat of the Dominion. If anything, the White Gold Concordat, which was signed at the end of the Great War, only further shattered the validity of the new dynasty and its rulers. Perhaps this is why members of the Elder Council plot for the death of Titus Mede II, as seen in the Dark Brotherhood questline. Perhaps the Emperor or his dynasties does not fit what the Council believes the Empire needs. The way I see it, Titus Mede is likely raring for a second shot at the Great War and hoping the Empire is ready for it. But the Elder Council may not be so confident. Or maybe the reverse is true. Maybe Mede wants to hold back and capitulate while the Council wants to tear the old treaty up and head to a war the Empire feels is doomed to fail. Or, and this is the most speculative, maybe this is the Emperor's plan as well. Maybe he too knows the time has come for someone new to take the throne, as well as create a tragedy for the Empire to rally around. But it's hard to say. The only thing I can say for certain is that the belief of the average person in the Empire, at least as seen in Skyrim, is waning. Even the staunchest of Imperial defenders, like the one and only General Tullius, agree with what Ulfric has to say about the Empire and what it's become. Sure, they're fighting so they have a more united front in the future, but will they really? They already lost Hammerfell. Even a subdued Skyrim will be war-torn and ragged. Morrowind is Morrowind. And High Rock is even more severed now. Remove Skyrim from the Empire, and High Rock is also on its own, as the last land link will be gone. And even if they kept Skyrim, High Rock wasn't very useful the last time around anyways. The best the Empire can hope for is to somehow hold the line the next time the Thalmor come knocking. But it will be far from united. Even when it was unified, they had their world rocked for 5 years straight. If the domino of Skyrim falls, then everything they fought for is doomed. Or is it? You'd think the Thalmor would just blatantly support the Stormcloaks if an independent Skyrim meant the end of the Empire, but it's possible that's not quite true. Consider that by the nature of an empire, the larger an institution is, the harder it becomes to manage. One of the biggest weaknesses of the Empire in the First Great War was their slow reaction in the early days of the war. With a near-continent spanning empire, plans and battle lines will be slow to form, especially when on the defensive. But if all the Empire, or rather Cyrodiil, had to worry about was itself, and could centralize its power, what would change? Hammerfell and Cyrodiil were the front lines of the last war, and Hammerfell has proven its ability to hold back and even repel an elvish invasion alone. Add to this that Ulfric himself expresses a desire, willingness, and understanding that Skyrim's forces would be needed away from the homeland when the greater evil of the Dominion comes calling. If he wins and gets Skyrim, he knows that fighting the Empire further accomplishes nothing. That is what the Thalmor want to prevent. They want the war to continue on. They want the season unending. They want the war to keep on moving without reprieve because the longer they fight, not only does it drain resources and manpower, but it also sows deeper dissenting grudges. If an independent Skyrim, or even a subjugated one, can't stand to look at their Imperial neighbors, then how willing will they be to fight for them? An easy, quick ending to the war means the chances for past woes to be forgotten by the time the naturally slower to rebuild and repopulate elves are ready for round 2, which means a higher chance for the now independent nations of man to unite against their elven foes. But that's a story for another day. Instead, for now, I want to leave off with this. For everyone fighting so hard and so fervently to maintain the Empire of Tiber Septim, I think it's important to remember that this is not the first time an empire has existed in Cyrodiil. This is the third. First there was Alesia, then Riemann Cyrodiil, and finally Tiber Septim. In fact, every time that it seems an empire will collapse forever, some aspect of Shor, Lorkhan, Shezar, whatever name you want to give him, shows up to save the day and kill a whole lot of elves. It's happened once, and it will no doubt happen again. And after almost 1,000 years, it might be time for the next cycle to begin. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you've liked, commented, and subscribed to support the channel and keep up to date with my work. A shout out to all my patrons whose hard-earned money flows directly into my bank account to help fund my ever-slow rise to perfect knowledge of all video game lore. If you'd like to support the channel, consider becoming a patron or a channel member. Both only cost $3 a month and give you access to a private Discord where you can hang out and directly interact with me, gain access to videos hours or even days earlier than everyone else, and more features as I grow the channel and get more comfortable. It's all optional, but it'd be deeply appreciated and directly beneficial to the health of the channel. So I hope you consider it if you're in a position to give. With that all said and done, I am the Hearth Guy, and I will see you all next time around the hearth. Humanity has an interesting relationship with the idea of elves. In an act of either humility or self-deprecation, depending on your perspective, we almost always depict elves as something intrinsically better than humans. Whether that be magically, culturally, emotionally, etc. It's honestly kind of insufferable at some points, but I can't help but admit there's a certain mystique to the elves of Tolkien, Dungeons & Dragons, Warhammer, and... well, there's an exception to every rule.